Through the darkest night, his light will shine. God is good. Yes.
Hebrew, Esther 7, 1 through 6, 9 through 10, and then 9, 20 through 22. So the king and Haman went to dine with the Queen Esther. And as they were drinking wine on the second day, the king was asked, Queen Esther, what is your petition? It will be given you. What is your request? Even up to half the kingdom, it will be granted. Then Queen Esther answered, If I have found favor with you, O king, and if it pleases your majesty, grant me my life. This is my petition. And spare my people. This is my request. For I and my people have been sold for destruction and slaughter and annihilation. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet, because no such distress would justify disturbing the king. King Xerxes asked Queen Esther, Who is he? Where is the man who has dared to do such thing? Esther said, The adversary and enemy is this vile Haman. And then 9 through 10. Then Harbona, one of the eunuchs attending the king, said, A gallows 70 feet high stands by Haman's house. He had it made for Mordecai, who spoke us up to help the king. The king said, Hang him on it. So they hanged Haman on the gallows he prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's fury subsided. And then 9, 20 through 22. Mordecai recorded these events, and he sent letters to all the Jews throughout provinces of King Xerxes, near and far, to have them celebrate annually the 14th and 15th days of the month of Adar, as the time when the Jews got relief from their enemies, and as the month when their sorrow was turned into joy and their mourning into a day of celebration. He wrote them to observe the days as days of feasting and joy, and giving presents of food to one another and gifts to the poor. Turns a reading of.
A friend of mine told of her little 6-year-old daughter having a birthday party. And she asked her daughter, well, what do you want for your birthday? And she says, I want a princess party. She had never been told about princesses. Mom had never bought her any princess things. She was not considered the princess of the family. The whole thing Mom had tried to avoid. But her daughter had been on the school grounds, and she had talked with her friends, and she knew all about the princesses. Anybody can name them all? Anyway, so they sent out the princess invitations. They got the princess cups and plates and silverware and napkins and the whole 9 yards. Her friends all came. Since she sent out the princess invitations, that was a code that she wanted princess merchandise. So she got a handbag, and she got a t-shirt, and she got a princess toothbrush, and a lot of other stuff. And for their meal, they had princess soup. All this stuff. And today, you can't just get your daughter a little playhouse. You have to get a castle so she can be the princess. I could do a whole sermon on what Disney is doing with the princess concept. Let's go on to a real princess, actually a real queen, Esther. Esther was a Jewish lady in the Persian Empire. The king, Xerxes, wanted a new wife. So he had a beauty contest. And Mordecai, Esther's cousin, who was a big man in the king's court. He was Jewish, and the king knew he was Jewish. But he said, why don't you try out for that? But don't tell them you're Jewish. Don't tell them you're related to me. Just try out on your own beauty. And sure enough, she was the most beautiful woman in the kingdom. The king fell in love with her and crowned her queen. Well, a number of years passed. And Mordecai was being lifted up by the king, but this Haman character didn't like that. He didn't like Jews. A lot of people don't like Jews. He just didn't like Jews on account. On account they take a day off. Everyone else works hard, but they take a day off. And they pray to some strange god. They don't have any idols to bow down to. They pray to the strange god. They eat the strange food. They're just strange people, and they really shouldn't be running the country. We should not have Jewish law telling the king what to do. So Haman wanted to get rid of Mordecai, and he wanted to get rid of the Jews. Mordecai heard about that, and he said to Esther, you've got to go to the king. You've got to save your people. And she said, but if I go to the king, he'll chop my head off. Nobody talks to the king without being asked. He says, you're going to have to do it. She said, okay. It may be the end of me, but I will do what I can. If I die, well, I die. But if I don't do it, we'll all die. She goes to the king. She asks for a special favor. Would you do me a special favor? And he says, sure. He says, let's have dinner with Mordecai and Haman. So they're all at dinner. And then he asks, well, what's this favor you want to have? And she says, there's somebody who's about to kill us all. Me, your queen, because I am a Jew and all of the Jewish people. And I'll be killed too. And the king gets upset because who would want to kill the queen? I mean, that's, what kings get upset about. And he says, who is this monster? And she points to Haman. And the king says, we're going to hang Haman on the very noose Haman built for Mordecai. And he did. Mordecai made this an annual festival for Jewish people all around the world. It's called Purim. Purim means just enough. Because that's what Esther did. She did just enough to save everyone. She turned it around. This Eucatastrophe. Some of you are wondering what that means. I hope so. It's a word that was invented by J.R.R. Tolkien. And what it is you take the word catastrophe, and kata means down, and strophe means stanza or turn. So a catastrophe is a downturn. A EU means good, as in eulogy, and evangel, with a V is actually a U. Good. Downturn. And what Tolkien and others was pointing to is that the best part of the story happens when there's this sudden, surprising, unknown turning from the bottom back up. It's that moment when everything is going to go wrong, and then something happens. And you don't know what's going to happen, and all of a sudden everything turns around. Eucatastrophe. I read this week that somebody said that the difference between a tragedy and a comedy is that the tragedy stopped too soon. You got to the bottom and you ended the story. Think of a good comedy. A good comedy always has a time when it gets down to the bottom. A romantic comedy, they don't love each other anymore and they're going various ways and they've got other people and they're all mixed up, and then something happens and it all turns around and they come spiraling up. It's a comedy. It's a eucatastrophe. And the world is changed by this very thing, and Jesus came into this world to teach us to think in terms of turning the world right side up by turning it upside down.
See, they tell you an eye for an eye. They tell you a tooth for a tooth. And then they say, this is God's way, but I'm here to tell you the truth. When somebody looks at you in anger and wants you inside of your head, go whack till you get them back. No, don't fight them, invite them to walk the other side instead. Turn it around, turn it around. Surprise them a little, start shifting the ground. To get right side up, turn upside down. Now is the time to turn it around. They tell you to worry about yourself before you help somebody else. Just look out for number one, that's what they say. But I've got a far better way. Someone asked you for a ride to the bus stop. I say, well, don't let them down. Just take it with a smile. Go the extra mile. Don't drop them at the bus stop. Drive them all the way to town. Turn it around. Turn it around. Surprise them a little. Start shifting the ground. To get right side up, turn upside shackles are out. Let it go, say take it if you please. Don't let them down, just turn it around. Say take my shoes, take my pants, take my BBBs. Turn it around, turn it around. Surprisingly, it'll start shifting the ground. To get right side up, turn upside down. Now is the time to turn it around. Turn it around. Surprisingly, it'll start shifting the ground. To get right side up, turn upside down. Now is the time to turn it around. Now is the time to turn it around.
Jesus came to turn it around for us, to show us, to tell us and show us how. And what happened was a whole bunch of people turned it around on him. But he didn't die in vain. He died on purpose. In his death, he turned around our whole understanding of good and bad, of right and wrong, of happiness and suffering. Suffering, we don't want suffering, but it's holy when it happens, because Jesus made it holy. And then God turned it around. God performed the most crucial Eucatastrophe anybody could ever experience. God not only took Jesus, the martyr, the sufferer, and turned him into King of Kings and Lord of Lords. God, through Jesus and in Jesus, glorified the whole story. And Jesus' completion is marvelous. And it's our lives. Our lives are to watch for and wait for the Eucatastrophe. When it's bad news, you should cheer and shout, because the good news isn't far behind. You understand? They try to tell us the bad news. They try to convince us of the bad news. Our response should be, but the good news is not far behind. And I'm holding my breath for it, and God will not fail. The Jews say they can summarize the entire Jewish tribe, the entire Jewish presence in the world, with 3 sentences. They tried to kill us. We survived. Let's eat. Yeah. Well, as Christians, we can use 3 sentences too. Christ has died. Christ is risen. Let's eat. Because Christ will come again and it'll be a holy banquet, and we're going to eat. We're going to be fed with life.
Here we go. God is good all the time. He put a song of praise in this heart of mine. God is good all the time. Through the darkest night, His light will shine. God is good